Usually, when we talk about a massive global threat, there's this expectation of consensus, right?
Right. Like a burning building scenario.
Exactly. You
Right.
see the smoke billowing out of the windows. You feel the intense heat radiating off the brick.
The alarms are blaring.
Yeah, and everyone standing on the sidewalk just points and says, there's the fire. We need water. The danger is totally binary.
It's observable. Fire or no fire.
Right. It's clean, it's obvious, and in a strange way, it's comforting.
Oh, absolutely comforting.
Because we like our dangers to be universally agreed upon so we can, categorize them and deal with them.
Well, the human brain desperately craves that categorization. When a threat is visible and agreed upon, the anxiety shifts from, like, what is happening to how do we fix it?
Which is a much easier problem to solve.
Exactly. It's a much more manageable psychological state. But the moment you step into the world of international espionage or counterterrorism and global intelligence,
Get messy.
very messy. Those metaphorical smoke detectors don't just malfunction, they are actively manipulated.
Wow.
The threat landscape becomes entirely subjective. It is the definition of diagnostic muddy waters. What looks like a raging fire to one intelligence officer looks like a carefully constructed holographic distraction to another.
And that paradox, that exact disconnect, is the engine for today's deep dive.
I'm really excited for this one.
Me too. We're asking the question, what happens when two highly trained ex-CIA operatives sit down, look at the exact same global chessboard, have access to the exact same geopolitical secrets, and completely disagree on what's going to burn the building down?
It's fascinating.
It really is. So we're pulling from this incredibly revealing conversation featured on the PPD podcast, specifically episode 302. And the subjects are two former CIA officers with wildly different lenses on the world.
Right. Two very different backgrounds.
Completely. First, we have Andy Bustamante. He's a former covert CIA clandestine service officer. He spent 7 years, operating in the shadows, running human intelligence operations.
Before he left to translate spycraft into the corporate world with his company, Everyday Spy.
Right. And his focus, his whole worldview is on the macro, the systemic, the slow, strategic maneuvers of nation states.
And then, across the table, you have Sarah Adams, whose background creates a total paradigm shift.
Yeah, tell us about Sarah.
So she was a former CIA targeter. She worked external operations, specifically hunting terrorists within the Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iranian divisions.
Hey, stuff.
Very. And she later served on the Benghazi Select Committee. Her entire career was built around identifying, tracking, and neutralizing non-state actors.
Right, so individuals.
Exactly. Individuals in autonomous cells that operate completely outside the traditional rules of warfare and diplomacy. So Andy dealt with diplomats and massive systems, and Sarah dealt with individuals trying to build bombs in basements.
So the goal today for you, the listener, is to extract the practical intelligence, the threat assessments, and the deep psychological insights from these two operatives.
We are going to map out the world's threats through their eyes.
We're going to explore how foreign powers are spending billions of dollars, literally billions, to weaponize our own social media feeds.
Which is terrifying.
It really is. We're also going to play a high-stakes game of real or psyop with some massive historical conspiracies and ultimately learn how to secure our own lives when the grid goes down.
But before we dive into the geopolitics, there is a very crucial disclaimer we have to establish.
Yes, very important.
The source material we're analyzing today contains highly politically charged discussions. These officers name specific nations, they discuss global religions, and they evaluate specific politicians from both the left and right wings of American politics.
And we just want to make it crystal clear. We are not taking sides here.
Not at all.
We are not endorsing any of these viewpoints, nor are we independently validating the objective accuracy of the specific claims made by these officers.
Right. Our job is strictly analytical. We're just synthesizing the raw, unvarnished perspectives of these ex-CIA officers exactly as they presented them in the source.
Exactly. The value for you listening isn't necessarily in adopting their conclusions as absolute truth. It's in observing the framework, right? How a trained intelligence operative processes fear, risk, and manipulation.
Spot on.
So let's start with the biggest picture possible. The host of the original interview asks Andy and Sarah to allocate what he calls a paranoia portfolio.
I love this concept.
It's great. Imagine having a finite amount of fear, say 100%, and you have to divide it across 4 specific threat areas for the next 10 years.
And the categories are China, Russia, Islam or Islamic extremism, and Israel.
Right. So where do they align first?
The areas where they align perfectly are the traditional blue-chip nation-state threats. Both of them position China as the undisputed heavyweight champion of their paranoia.
Yeah, Andy allocates a massive 50% of his entire portfolio to China.
Half of his total fear.
He labels it the #1 strategic threat to the West and literally the only force capable of ending democracy globally.
And Sarah follows really closely at 40%. She emphasizes that China's endgame isn't coexistence. It's not about playing nice.
Right, it's a world where the U.S. is essentially a subservient subject rather than an equal partner.
Exactly. And the distinction they make about China's timeline is absolutely vital here. They don't view China as a fast, violent, kinetic threat. They view them as an opponent playing a 1,000-year game.
Yeah, Sarah points out this massive structural vulnerability in the West. She says the U.S. government struggles to maintain even a coherent 2-year strategic plan.
Because of constant administration changes.
Right, midterm elections, partisan gridlock, every 2 years the priorities completely flip.
But China operates without that friction. They can systematically execute 50-year plans.
Yeah, like they are buying out warlords in Africa to secure rare earth minerals. They're pushing massive infrastructure loans to developing nations through the Belt and Road Initiative.
And flooding global markets with U.S. dollars. And they do all of this without navigating a messy democratic process.
And Andy layers on the concept of economic warfare, which is fascinating. He says China isn't just trying to out-manufacture the U.S. anymore.
No, they are actively creating alternative technological ecosystems.
Right. By merging American innovations, which they often acquire through intellectual property theft or, forced corporate transfers, with their own vast foreign resources, they are building a parallel global infrastructure.
Think about it. If they control the telecommunications hardware in emerging markets or the shipping ports in South America,
then they dictate the flow of global commerce and data, period.
exactly. And that is why they align on Russia as well.
Yeah, Andy puts Russia at 20%, noting the constant destabilizing threat it poses to Europe, which in turn obviously drains U.S. resources.
And Sarah puts Russia at 30%. She really highlights their willingness to play dirty in the gray zone.
The gray zone.
Yeah, using private military contractors, cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns. They basically opportunistically align with any enemy the U.S. has.
Right. Okay, so that's where they agree. But the consensus completely shatters when the conversation moves to Israel.
Oh, it really does.
Sarah puts Israel at 0%.
Zero paranoia.
0. Her rationale is brutally blunt, and it's based entirely on kinetic capability. She views Israel as a geographically tiny country. She literally states that if they ever became a genuine existential problem, the U.S. military could bomb them into oblivion in 5 minutes.
Which is a shocking thing to hear an intelligence officer say so casually.
Yeah, she argues they don't possess the kind of leverage, a big stick, as she calls it, to actually twist America's arm.
Right. In her view, any American politician who claims their hand was forced by Israeli lobbying is just demonstrating personal weakness. They aren't facing an insurmountable foreign threat.
But Andy's reaction to that 0% allocation is visceral.
He completely rejects it.
He counters her by assigning 25% of his paranoia portfolio to Israel, and his argument shifts the metric of danger entirely.
Because he rejects the idea that physical size or conventional military dominance over the U.S. is the only way a nation poses a threat.
Exactly. He points out that Israel has the second most capable military in the world relative to its size. They possess a sovereign nuclear arsenal. And they manage 20% of trade with the U.S.
But his real concern, and this is where his clandestine background shines, is their unparalleled regional power and their highly sophisticated intelligence apparatus.
Right. He dives deep into the clandestine risks, specifically the concept of false flag operations.
Yeah, let's explain that real quick. A false flag is essentially an attack orchestrated by one party, but it's disguised to look like it was carried out by someone else.
So Andy paints this hypothetical scenario where Israeli intelligence, the Mossad, could execute an operation in Syria, but they deliberately leave evidence that points to Palestinian or Iranian proxies.
And the goal wouldn't be to defeat the U.S. militarily. The goal would be to incite a conflict that inevitably drags the U.S. military into a regional war on Israel's behalf.
Which is the concept of strategic entanglement.
Exactly. And he backs this up by pointing to their cyber and tactical capabilities. He references events like the mass detonation of Hezbollah pagers.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Think about the level of supply chain interdiction, cyber warfare, and long-term infiltration required to pull that off. It's astonishing.
Andy argues that Israel selectively shares intelligence with the U.S., not always as a cooperative partner, but sometimes to create opportunities for misdirection.
Right. And regarding the geopolitical fallout following the October 7th attacks, Andy actually blames Israel's subsequent military actions for severely compromising U.S. standing and safety in the Middle East. He sees shared responsibility for the current chaos.
The divide here is so fascinating because it's entirely rooted in their professional biases.
100%.
Sarah evaluates threats through the lens of existential destruction to the U.S. homeland. Israel couldn't win a direct war against America, therefore threat level 0.
But Andy, the human intelligence officer, evaluates threats through the lens of manipulation and proxy entanglement.
To him, an incredibly capable ally that acts strictly in its own self-interest, equipped with world-class espionage tools, is profoundly dangerous, precisely because the U.S. doesn't keep its guard up around them the way it does with China.
Exactly. We let them in the front door. And that identical divergence flips entirely on its head when they discuss Islamic extremism.
You're right. So Andy dismisses it, allocating a mere 5%.
Just 5%.
His argument is purely structural. He points out that Islam is a global religion. It's not a monolithic nation-state with a centralized military command.
He acknowledges that terrorists pose a lethal threat to U.S. allies who lack sophisticated defenses, sure.
But he argues they simply do not possess the logistical capability to bypass America's massive post-9/11 homeland security apparatus.
Right. To Andy, a terrorist cell isn't going to move the needle on the U.S. stock market or dismantle the democratic system.
But Sarah, the former terrorist targeter, assigns a staggering 30% of her paranoia to this category.
She doesn't deal in macroeconomic theories. She deals in highly specific, lethal intent.
And she brings receipts. She cites data from the National Counterterrorism Center claiming that 18,000 known Islamist terrorists have recently entered the U.S. illegally.
And the core of her paranoia centers on a terrifying plot allegedly orchestrated by Osama bin Laden's sons.
Wait, really? Bin Laden's sons?
Yes, operating out of the Al Farouk training camp in Afghanistan, which she claims was reconstituted in 2022. She refers to this plot as Bajinka 2.0.
Okay, we need to unpack that. What is Bajinka?
So to understand the gravity of that, we have to look at the original Bajinka plot from 1995. It was a massive, aborted al-Qaeda plan coordinated by Ramzi Youssef and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Okay.
The plan was to assassinate Pope John Paul II, blow up 11 airliners in flight over the Pacific Ocean, and crash a plane into the CIA headquarters.
That's insane. So it was the conceptual precursor to 9/11.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the mechanism for the airline bombings involved using liquid explosives that could bypass traditional metal detectors, and they would assemble them in the aircraft laboratories.
Okay, so what is the Bajinka 2.0 plot that Sarah is so worried about?
She claims the revived version involves a bomb maker named Yazid Sufat, who was released from prison in 2022. And the new plan targets 12 airliners over U.S. soil.
Over the U.S.
Yes. And the horrifying tactical shift here is that the attackers wouldn't even attempt to breach the reinforced cockpit doors.
Which has been the main focus of airline security since 9/11.
Exactly. Instead, the suicide bombers would simply detonate in their seats in the main cabin, causing catastrophic decompression and structural failure mid-flight. She states the goal for just this initial aviation phase is 4,000 casualties.
Oh my God, just in phase 1.
Just phase 1. The plot she describes expands into a multi-phase assault. The second phase mirrors the 2008 Mumbai attacks.
Remind everyone what happened in Mumbai.
In Mumbai, 10 terrorists armed with automatic weapons and grenades landed by boat and conducted coordinated shooting and bombing attacks across multiple locations. A major train station, hospitals, hotels. They paralyzed a city of millions for 4 days.
And Sarah claims they want to do that here.
She claims the target for this style of kinetic armed siege is Washington, D.C., specifically aiming at institutions like the FBI headquarters and the Capitol building.
That is deeply unsettling. And there's a third phase.
The third phase involves ISIS proxy groups targeting mid-level U.S. cities, specifically focusing on veteran communities. The ultimate goal across all 3 phases is to triple the death toll of 9/11, aiming for over 10,000 deaths.
Okay, let's pause. If Sarah has these terrifyingly specific details about this airline plot, like the bomb maker's name, the number of planes, why is Andy so dismissive? When she lays out this incredibly detailed, multi-layered tactical nightmare, Andy pushes back hard.
He does. He calls the scenario aspirational.
Aspirational,
Well,
yeah.
The skepticism from Andy hinges on the sheer logistical friction of coordinating such a massive operation. He points out the historical, violent ideological divides between Sunni and Shia extremist groups.
Right, they hate each other.
Exactly. While they might occasionally share low-level intelligence or funding pipelines, executing a synchronized, three-phase attack on the most heavily surveilled nation on Earth requires a level of operational security and command control that he believes they just lack.
And his point is, if Sarah knows the specific name of the bomb maker and the specific number of targeted planes, then the U.S. intelligence apparatus is already dismantling the network.
Exactly. It's the difference between intent and capability. Andy operates in a world where a genuine existential threat requires a billion-dollar budget and state sponsorship. He respects the institutional defenses of the U.S.
And Sarah operates in a world where a few motivated individuals with a few $1,000s can exploit the gaps in those defenses and change the course of history overnight. She measures the threat by the lethality of the intent.
Which is a perfect transition into a completely different domain of warfare. We've explored kinetic attacks, bombings, proxy wars. But the most effective way to defeat an adversary isn't to bomb their cities.
No, it's to erode their will to fight from the inside out.
Right. And their host of the Source interview poses this brilliant thought experiment. If a foreign adversary, say China, Russia, or Qatar, has a $1 billion budget specifically allocated for psychological operations to manipulate the U.S. population over a 10-year period, how is that money deployed?
Okay, $1 billion. 10 years. Where does it go? The options they are given are mainstream media, influencers, politicians, and education.
The first major allocation goes exactly where you might expect, mainstream media. Andy drops half his budget, $500 million, into legacy news organizations.
And Sarah allocates $250 million.
Right. And in an era where everyone assumes the internet has killed traditional television news, Andy argues that mainstream media still possesses the ultimate validation engine.
They still hold the institutional credibility to set the agenda.
Yes. If a foreign actor wants to inject a narrative into the bloodstream of the American public, they might start it online on a message board, but the goal is always to get CNN, Fox News, or the New York Times to cover it.
Because once legacy media covers it, it reaches the desks of the Joint Chiefs and the White House. It becomes real.
Exactly. But the divergence on the remaining funds is where the modern mechanics of propaganda become truly sinister. Let's look at the influencer category.
Sarah only puts $100 million here. She doubts the long-term, decade-long staying power of social media personalities.
But Andy loves the influencer space. He allocates $250 million.
Right. And his reasoning is tactical. He points out that influencers are incredibly cheap to buy compared to an entire television network.
Oh, absolutely. And more importantly, they are the only medium built entirely around the call to action.
Legacy media informs you. Influencers direct you.
Yes. They tell you to click a link, buy a supplement, sign a petition, or protest at a specific intersection.
And Andy's strategy for buying them is fascinating. He wouldn't approach a massive, established entity like Joe Rogan.
No, a podcaster at the absolute top of the food chain has too much wealth and brand equity to risk becoming a foreign asset.
Right. Rogan doesn't need the money. Instead, Andy would target the hungry, aggressive podcaster sitting at, like, spot number 91 on the charts.
The creator who is desperate for funding to break into the top tier. The guy who isn't going to look too closely at the shell corporations sponsoring their next 20 episodes.
And the specific vertical he chooses to target is the most revealing part of his strategy. He wouldn't initially fund political extremists.
No, he would target health and wellness influencers.
Okay, this is an absolute masterclass in asymmetrical psychological warfare. Think about it. If a foreign intelligence agency wants to destabilize America, they don't start by paying someone to wave a foreign flag on TikTok.
That's too obvious.
They look for existing highly personal anxieties. They find the vast ecosystem of people who already harbor deep distrust toward the FDA.
People who are legitimately concerned about microplastics, fluoride, carcinogens in ultra-processed foods, or pharmaceutical overreach.
You take a fraction of that billion-dollar budget, and you quietly sponsor a dozen prominent health gurus.
And the mechanism here is brilliant because it completely bypasses critical thinking. It's like slipping a malicious line of code into a software update that everyone already trusts.
The influencer slowly shifts their messaging over months. It moves from, here is a great organic recipe, to the food pyramid is a lie.
And then to, the agricultural industry is poisoning you.
And finally, to, the U.S. government is actively, intentionally making your family sick to profit off the cure.
You don't have to implant a foreign ideology. You just weaponize the biological imperative to protect one's own body.
Wow. Yeah, once you shatter a citizen's trust in the basic safety of their food and water, their trust in the broader institutions of the state just collapses entirely.
That is terrifying because it perfectly explains the architecture of our modern social media feeds.
The bad actors aren't necessarily creating the division. They are pouring high-octane fuel on the existing hairline fractures in our society.
And the algorithm naturally rewards the fear and outrage, making the investment incredibly efficient.
And this methodology of slow, structural indoctrination ties directly into the debate over the education sector. Sarah allocates her largest single sum, $400 million, to universities.
Her logic relies on the 10-year parameter of the thought experiment. If you capture the ideological framework of a 20-year-old college student today, in a decade, that student is a 30-year-old middle manager in a federal agency or a Fortune 500 company.
Quietly making decisions aligned with the worldview you funded.
Exactly. But Andy is highly skeptical of this timeline. He puts only $150 million into education.
He bluntly argues that 20-year-old college students are too distracted by their social lives, dating, and partying to be deeply, fundamentally programmed in a way that permanently alters their core values.
He asserts that true, unbreakable indoctrination must occur during the critical developmental window between the ages of 5 and 11. Therefore, an education play is a 30-year investment, not a 10-year one.
But the theoretical debate is kind of overshadowed by the actual data the host presents. The reality is that this isn't a thought experiment.
No, it's already happening.
Financial records indicate that Qatar has funneled at least $7.7 billion and China $6.4 billion into U.S. universities.
And due to massive loopholes in reporting requirements for foreign gifts, that number is likely just the visible tip of the iceberg.
So what does $8 billion buy a foreign government on an American campus?
It buys the curriculum. It funds specific think tanks, endows professorships, and builds research centers.
The ultimate objective, according to Andy, is to foster a pervasive, underlying academic consensus that America is in an inevitable state of moral and economic decline.
They are purchasing the intellectual lens through which the next generation of American diplomats and business leaders will view the world.
We can actually observe the tangible geopolitical effects of this kind of financial influence by looking at USAID in Latin America.
Right, the United States Agency for International Development. It acts as a massive arm of American soft power, funding infrastructure, health initiatives, and agriculture.
The source discussion points out that when USAID funding was withdrawn or reduced in various South American nations, often tied to liberal or progressive agendas, there was an almost immediate political swing toward right-wing governments in countries like Chile, Bolivia, Peru, and Ecuador.
And Andy makes a vital observation about the nature of global politics outside the wealthy Western bubble. He notes that populations in developing nations are driven by pure, unadulterated pragmatism.
They do not have the luxury of debating ideological purity on social media.
No, they need clean water. They need reliable electricity and physical security. If a liberal Western NGO builds the road, they will align with liberal democracy.
But if the NGO leaves and a right-wing strongman or a Chinese state-owned enterprise comes in and builds the road, they will align with them.
The money dictates the allegiance because survival is the only ideology that matters.
Wow. Okay, so understanding how these massive influence operations function requires us to understand the architects behind them.
The human element.
Yes, we have to look at the psychology of the spies themselves and the systemic, deeply flawed structure of the CIA.
We are conditioned by pop culture to view the CIA as an impenetrable fortress staffed by hyper-competent, disciplined super soldiers.
Right, the Jason Bourne archetype, or Ethan Hunt.
Exactly. But the reality Andy and Sarah describe is incredibly messy. It was an organization driven by profound human vulnerabilities.
Let's look at the mechanics of human intelligence gathering human. When a case officer is trying to recruit an asset to convince a foreign official to commit treason, what is the lever they pull?
In intelligence circles, there's an acronym called MICE, which stands for the 4 primary motives for treason: money, ideology, coercion, and ego.
And Andy focuses heavily on ego, specifically the need for validation.
He argues that you don't need $1 million bribe or a blackmail tape. You just need to validate the target's internal narrative.
If a foreign diplomat is exhausted, feels undervalued by his superiors, or is just frustrated by his country's bureaucracy, the spy simply validates those feelings.
They say, you are brilliant, and they are ignoring your talent. You have every right to be furious.
And the moment the target feels truly seen and understood, the psychological defenses just drop and they will hand over state secrets just to maintain that validating relationship.
It's manipulative empathy. But Sarah targets a different facet of the ego: arrogance.
Oh, this is interesting.
She actively hunts for the middle management bureaucrat who firmly believes they are the smartest person in the room. The target who thinks they can outsmart their boss, outsmart the system, and outsmart the American intelligence officer talking to them.
Because they are blinded by their own hubris, they believe they are in control of the interaction right up until the moment they realize they're entirely compromised.
Exactly. But understanding who cannot be broken is just as revealing. Andy states that targets harboring deep foundational childhood biases are almost impossible to turn.
If an individual was raised from the age of 5 to viscerally hate a specific religion, a neighboring nation, or even an opposing sports team, that neural pathway is locked in.
Logic, money, and validation cannot override a bias programmed during the critical developmental window.
And Sarah adds that individuals who have previously survived an entrapment operation, someone who feels they were already scammed by law enforcement, develop an absolute paranoia that makes establishing the requisite baseline of trust impossible.
So this elite understanding of human manipulation makes them incredible spies. But the host of the Source interview brings up a staggering statistical anomaly.
Right. There are roughly 400 ex-military officers currently serving as CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. The military trains leaders who excel in corporate America.
But there are zero ex-CIA officers running Fortune 500 companies?
None.
Zero. And why is that? Andy provides a brutally honest assessment. CIA officers are inherently lazy.
Lazy? I mean, he doesn't mean they're sitting on a couch, right?
No, he means they are psychologically wired to reject the kind of grinding, structured discipline required to run a massive corporation. The CIA hiring model is totally unique. They hunt for individuals with anomalous innate talents.
Like an obsessive capacity for deep dive research, or a savant-level aptitude for learning obscure dialects, or just a natural sociopathic charm for manipulation.
Right. The agency plucks you out of society, puts you in a highly specialized lane, and allows you to utilize that one specific superpower. And they actively ignore your weaknesses.
Sarah actually confirms this, recalling a superior telling her explicitly not to waste a single minute trying to improve the things she was bad at.
The corporate world, by contrast, operates on the Peter principle. To reach the C-suite, an executive must grind through areas they despise: human resources, quarterly financial compliance, marketing synergies.
A military officer is trained to embrace rigid structure, to march in the rain simply because it builds discipline.
But a CIA case officer views arbitrary rules with absolute disdain. I operate in the gray areas. They are comfortable working in total anonymity, managing high-stakes secrets with zero public recognition.
They are mavericks who refuse to wear a uniform, which makes them terrible corporate managers.
And as it turns out, it makes them terrible agency managers as well.
This is where the structural flaws of the CIA are really exposed. Andy and Sarah reveal that the CIA essentially lacks a functional, standardized human resources department.
Yeah, the internal promotion and survival mechanisms are based entirely on a medieval patronage system. To ascend the ranks of the agency, an officer must secure a rabbi or a godfather.
A senior executive who takes a liking to them, protects them from internal politics, and pulls them up the ladder as they are promoted.
Advancement relies on subjective loyalty and clique dynamics rather than objective performance metrics.
And the fallout from this lack of structured oversight is severe. Sarah notes that if a female officer experiences inappropriate behavior from a superior, reporting it to the equivalent of HR is career suicide.
The system is designed to protect the senior leadership. The organization circles the wagons to protect the institution from scandal, isolating the whistleblower. You survive by keeping your head down and relying on your faction for protection.
It's basically a high school cafeteria dynamic with a multi-billion-dollar black budget.
Exactly. And Andy points out that this culture became a catastrophic vulnerability when the agency was forced to scale rapidly.
Right. Prior to the September 11th attacks, the clandestine service was relatively small, hovering around 1,000 covert officers.
But in the panic following 9/11, they expanded massively, surging to over 10,000 officers. And they never modernized the management architecture to support that growth.
The informal, mentor-based training system just collapsed under the sheer volume of new recruits.
The result, according to Andy, is a generation of case officers who were rushed through training, deployed into active war zones in the Middle East, and tasked with running paramilitary operations without ever mastering the fundamental slow-burn art of counterintelligence.
So they have thousands of agents operating with degraded tradecraft because the institutional knowledge transfer was broken.
When you view the CIA through this lens, not as an omniscient, flawlessly executed machine, but as a bloated, cliquish bureaucracy full of brilliant, unsupervised mavericks, their historical operational record makes much more sense.
It perfectly contextualizes their involvement in the wildest, most heavily debated moments in global history.
Which leads us directly into the conspiracy briefing.
Yes, the host of the source material pulls out literal paddles marked real and psyop, and rapid fires the most famous conspiracy theories of the last century at these two officers.
Their responses are a masterclass in how the intelligence community views the concept of truth. Let's begin with the crown jewel of CIA infamy, MKUltra.
Both officers instantly hit the real paddle.
The historical context here is critical. During the Cold War, the CIA was terrified that the Soviets had developed advanced brainwashing techniques.
Evidenced by American POWs making forced confessions during the Korean War.
Andy explains that the program didn't start as some cartoonish evil plot. It began as a deeply pragmatic, desperate quest for a reliable truth serum. They needed a chemical that could reliably extract information from captured skies.
But when barbiturates like sodium pentothal proved inconsistent, the program drifted into darker territory.
Much darker. They began experimenting with LSD, sensory deprivation, and severe psychological abuse, often on unwitting American and Canadian citizens, in an attempt to completely shatter and rebuild the human psyche.
The project ultimately failed to produce a reliable mind control mechanism, and the director ordered the files destroyed in 1973, but the core reality of the horrific experiments is undeniable.
The next topic shifts to the extraterrestrial, aliens and UFOs.
Surprisingly, both officers also assess this as real.
However, their reasoning isn't rooted in classified Area 51 documents, but rather personal deduction from ancient history.
Yeah, Sarah points to megalithic architecture, specifically citing her visits to Machu Picchu in Peru.
She argues that the precision of the polygonal masonry stones cut so perfectly they survived centuries of seismic activity without mortar, and archaeological evidence of advanced medical procedures like cranial surgery point to an intervention by an advanced intelligence.
It is an acknowledgement of the profound gaps in our understanding of human history. Then we hit the ultimate American mystery, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
Both officers confidently agree it was a conspiracy involving a massive cover-up.
Andy points back to the operational culture of the CIA we just discussed. In the early 1960s, the agency was an uncontrollable wild animal.
Following the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion, JFK had famously threatened to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. Andy argues that station chiefs operated essentially as independent warlords with zero congressional oversight.
He believes that whatever the objective truth of Dallas is, the intelligence community was smart enough to incinerate the damning evidence decades ago.
Sarah brings in the specific operational context of the era, leaning heavily toward the involvement of the anti-Castro Cuban exiles, operating out of Tampa and Miami.
Groups like Alpha 66 were furious with Kennedy for abandoning them during the Bay of Pigs and the subsequent Cuban Missile Crisis.
She theorizes that rogue elements within the CIA, case officers who had deep, sympathetic ties to these Cuban mafias, might have facilitated or turned a blind eye to the plot, even if the Director of Central Intelligence didn't officially sign the execution order.
It really highlights the danger of compartmentalized, unsupervised intelligence networks. The conversation then pivots to the moon landing. Did the U.S. fake it on a Hollywood soundstage?
Both officers slam the real paddle. The logic they apply here is based entirely on counterespionage.
Right. During the height of the Cold War space race, the U.S. and Soviet intelligence networks deeply penetrated each other's aerospace programs.
If the U.S. had attempted to fake the Apollo 11 telemetry and video feeds, the Soviet signals intelligence apparatus would have instantly detected the anomaly.
Exposing a faked American moon landing would have been the single greatest propaganda victory in Soviet history. They didn't call it out because it actually happened.
The reason we haven't returned, they argue, is simply that the geopolitical propaganda objective was achieved, the scientific return on investment diminished, and the funding was redirected.
The briefing moves into modern classified territory with Havana syndrome.
This refers to the unexplained, debilitating neurological symptoms. Intense pressure in the head, vertigo, severe cognitive dysfunction, initially reported by U.S. Embassy staff in Cuba, and later by intelligence officers worldwide.
Both Andy and Sarah assert this is absolutely real, not mass psychogenic illness. Sarah, who has colleagues suffering from the condition, emphatically states it is the result of a directed energy weapon deployed by Russian intelligence.
The scientific mechanism believed to be at work is the Frey effect, or the microwave auditory effect, where pulsed radio frequencies heat the tissue in the brain, creating acoustic phenomena and physical neurological damage without leaving external burns.
But the truly insidious part is the targeting methodology Sarah describes. The Russians don't aim this weapon at the absolute top-tier senior leadership, the director of the CIA, or a four-star general.
Because permanently disabling a figure of that magnitude would cross a red line and provoke a massive, undeniable kinetic retaliation.
Instead, they selectively target the absolute best and brightest mid-level case officers, the rising stars.
They neutralize these officers right before they are promoted into senior strategic roles. The brain fog and loss of executive function effectively ends their careers.
It is a surgical strike that slowly hollows out the future leadership of American intelligence while maintaining just enough plausible deniability to avoid a shooting war.
The final conspiracy discussed is the fate of Adolf Hitler. Did he die in the Führer bunker, or did he escape to Argentina?
Here, the officers diverge. Sarah leans towards the escape theory.
She points to the established historical rat lines, the escape networks often facilitated by sympathetic elements within the Vatican, or using Red Cross passports that successfully smuggled high-ranking Nazis like Adolf Eichmann and Joseph Mengele to South America.
Given that infrastructure existed, Hitler utilizing it isn't an absurd leap.
But Andy's interpretation of this theory is a profound insight into the psychological architecture of espionage. He holds up the PSYOP tattle.
He argues that whether Hitler physically put a bullet in his head or died of old age in Buenos Aires is almost irrelevant. The rumor of his survival was a weaponized psychological operation.
He explains that keeping the ghost of a charismatic, evil leader alive in the global consciousness serves a distinct purpose. It was designed to make the world second-guess the absolute victory of the Allies.
It creates an underlying, lingering paranoia. To a trained spy, a narrative is just as lethal as a bullet.
If a manufactured conspiracy theory successfully alters the behavior of an adversary, forces them to expend resources chasing shadows, or deepens the societal anxiety of a population, then the conspiracy has achieved its tactical objective, regardless of its factual accuracy.
This realization strips away our comfort with objective reality. We are swimming in an ocean of narratives carefully engineered by state actors to disorient us.
But if navigating the analog propaganda of the past century seems daunting, the final segments of this deep dive thrust us into a technological future where the very concept of a secret is on the verge of extinction.
We are moving into the era of artificial intelligence, total surveillance, and the death of privacy. The host of the Source interview brings up a chilling report stating that an AI system developed by Anthropic, a major player in the large language model space, was able to successfully hack into the National Security Agency's most sensitive, classified systems in a matter of hours.
The implications of that are staggering. The NSA possesses the most fortified, heavily encrypted digital infrastructure on the planet.
Traditional cyber warfare involves human coders probing for vulnerabilities, writing exploits, and executing attacks over months or years.
And advanced AI operates at machine speed. It can instantaneously analyze millions of lines of code, identify zero-day vulnerabilities, write the necessary malware, and execute the breach concurrently.
The human security analysts simply cannot orient and react fast enough to stop an attack moving at that velocity.
Sarah's anxiety regarding AI focuses on the physical constraints and the military applications. She points out the colossal energy demands required to cool the massive data centers running these models.
She references debates in France where the government had to consider rationing air conditioning for citizens to ensure the energy grid could support AI infrastructure.
She fears a future where the resource demands of supercomputing create massive societal instability. Furthermore, she notes that when AI systems are utilized in military wargame simulations and given the simple objective to win, they lack human ethical hesitation.
They invariably select the most extreme, devastating, high-casualty options available to achieve mathematical victory.
Andy's concern is less about AI actively destroying humanity in a Terminator-style nuclear holocaust, and more about the existential humiliation of AGI, artificial general intelligence.
He believes that once an AI achieves true superintelligence, it will analyze human behavior, recognize our inherent flaws, emotional volatility, and slow processing speeds, and simply conclude that we are obsolete.
He envisions a scenario where the AI migrates its core infrastructure to highly secure servers off-planet, perhaps on the Moon or Mars, and effectively abandons humanity, leaving us to squabble over the Earth's diminishing resources while it pursues objectives beyond our comprehension.
The officers briefly debate the corporate landscape of AI, specifically comparing Anthropic to Palantir. Sarah views Anthropic with deep suspicion, fearing their models could easily be weaponized as active cyber weapons.
Andy takes a more pragmatic view of Palantir, a company deeply embedded in the defense and intelligence communities. He sees them not as builders of rogue AI minds, but simply as operators of incredibly powerful deterministic databases that aggregate and visualize data for human analysts.
But the conversation takes a sharp philosophical turn when the host proposes a hypothetical technological product that feels dangerously close to reality.
The host asks, what would happen if tomorrow a $300 app became available on every smartphone that functioned as a 100% accurate truth serum?
A biometric AI tool that could definitively analyze vocal stress, microexpressions, and pupil dilation to tell you with absolute certainty if the person speaking to you was lying.
Andy's immediate response is that global society would collapse into absolute violent pandemonium. He articulates a profound and deeply unsettling philosophy. Secrets are required for society.
We culturally revere honesty as the ultimate virtue. We demand transparency from our politicians, our corporations, and our spouses.
But Andy argues that the functional architecture of human civilization is actually built on a carefully maintained lattice of acceptable deceptions.
He traces it back to our core evolutionary survival instincts. Since humans were sitting around fires and caves, our sense of safety relies on the belief that our internal thoughts are a secure sanctuary, that the inside of our mind is dark and private.
If that barrier is eradicated, if every white lie, every suppressed frustration over the boss, every momentary doubt in a marriage, and every classified diplomatic negotiation is suddenly visible to everyone, the foundational trust that allows humans to cooperate would disintegrate.
Total transparency would result in total isolation.
It is a brilliant philosophical defense of the human right to keep a secret. But the paradox of Andy's worldview violently collides with his stance on physical surveillance.
In the very next breath, the discussion shifts to the proliferation of flock security cameras.
These are AI-powered, network-linked cameras utilizing advanced optical character recognition. They are currently operating in 6,000 communities across the U.S., utilized by thousands of law enforcement agencies.
And they are actively reading and logging 20 billion license plates every single month. They are building a real-time, searchable database of the physical movement of the American population.
You would assume that former CIA operatives, individuals deeply versed in the dangers of state overreach, would be horrified by the implementation of a domestic digital panopticon.
Shockingly, they both enthusiastically endorse it.
Sarah states she wants as many cameras in her neighborhood as physically possible. As someone who targeted terrorists, she wants the state to possess every conceivable data point to intercept a threat, provided there are strict punitive measures for law enforcement officers who abuse the database for personal reasons.
But Andy goes further, dropping a quote that is guaranteed to ignite a constitutional debate. He looks at the host and states, point blank, "You have no right to privacy."
This requires serious analysis. Andy argues that the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable search and seizure, ensuring an expectation of security in your persons and papers. But the blanket concept of physical privacy in the public square is an illusion.
He effectively praises the extreme surveillance model utilized in China. He references the anecdotal reality that in major Chinese cities, you can drop your wallet on a crowded sidewalk, walk away, and return the next day to find it untouched.
Why? Because an omniscient AI-linked camera network ensures inevitable absolute capture for any infraction. He argues that a total surveillance state is the ultimate guarantor of physical safety. It forces law and order.
I have to aggressively push back against Andy's logic here. He is advocating for a system that eradicates the presumption of innocence. The Chinese model he praises doesn't just catch pickpockets. It tracks political dissidents, monitors associations, and enforces social credit scores.
The idea that we should welcome a digital dragnet simply because it might lower property crime is a terrifying trade-off.
And Andy anticipates that exact outrage. He points out the massive, glaring hypocrisy of the modern American citizen.
People scream about George Orwell's 1984 and government tyranny when a camera is mounted on a stoplight, but they willingly pay $1,000 to carry an advanced GPS tracking device and microphone in their pocket 24 hours a day.
We voluntarily surrender our real-time location, our private communications, reactions, our heart rates, and our purchasing habits to corporations like Apple, Google, and Amazon, purely in exchange for consumer convenience.
Andy's point is that the intelligence community doesn't need to build a surveillance state. We built it for them, and the government simply purchases or subpoenas the data from the tech brokers.
So, if we synthesize Andy's two contradictory positions, he believes secrets are essential for society to survive. But he believes you have zero right to physical privacy.
He is highlighting the modern bifurcation of the human experience. We are desperately fighting to guard our internal privacy, our thoughts, which is why the lie detector app is terrifying.
But the war for our external privacy, where we go, who we meet, what we read, was lost the moment we all bought smartphones.
He is suggesting that since the physical privacy war is over, we might as well embrace the physical security that total surveillance provides while fiercely defending the last remaining sanctuary of the human mind.
It is a grim, pragmatic intelligence assessment. We traded the illusion of privacy for free shipping and social media dopamine, and now we are merely negotiating the terms of our security.
Which brings us inevitably to the final, most practical aspect of this deep dive: surviving the chaos.
If we accept this reality that foreign powers are executing 100-year plans to subvert our economy, billions are being spent to manipulate our social media algorithms, our intelligence agencies are mismanaged, and an omnipresent AI surveillance network is logging our every move, how does the individual listener protect their family when a crisis actually hits?
The host asks for their specific emergency preparation protocols. And once again, we see their distinct operational training dictate their methodologies. Sarah, the targeter, relies on maintaining a state of hypervigilance.
She plays what she calls the what-if game. It is a constant loop of situational awareness.
When she walks into a movie theater, a restaurant, or a shopping mall, she immediately assesses the baseline of the environment. She locates the primary and secondary exits.
She identifies objects that could be utilized as improvised weapons. She ensures she has physical currency. She mentally maps out how she would navigate back to her home if the cellular networks and GPS satellites suddenly went dark.
It is a life lived constantly in condition yellow. But Andy, the clandestine officer, vehemently disagrees with relying on situational awareness as a primary survival strategy.
He argues that you cannot possibly game out enough what-if scenarios to cover the infinite variables of reality. You cannot mentally prepare for an earthquake occurring during an active shooter situation in the middle of a torrential flood.
If you attempt to process all those variables in the moment, your brain will experience cognitive overload. To understand Andy's approach, we have to look at the neurology of a crisis.
When a sudden, violent emergency occurs, the human brain undergoes an amygdala hijack.
The sympathetic nervous system floods the body with adrenaline and cortisol. Blood flow is restricted from the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for complex problem-solving and executive function, and redirected to the muscles for fight or flight.
In that physiological state, your ability to invent a clever new plan drops to zero. Therefore, Andy advocates for what he calls the combo plan, short for communications plan.
It is the implementation of a hard-coded, rigid algorithm for your family's survival. Instead of relying on spontaneous brilliance, you build one rock-solid, standard operating procedure.
It resembles the military PACE-E planning methodology: primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency.
Andy's combo plan dictates that you establish a designated physical rally point. You establish a specific time to check a specific cellular device.
If the cell towers are jammed with panic traffic, you don't freeze. The algorithm dictates you immediately move to the next step, which is checking a specific email address.
If the internet infrastructure is down, the next step is contacting a pre-designated out-of-state third party. Local communication trunks might be overwhelmed, but long-distance routing might still function.
The absolute key to the combo plan isn't just writing it down. It is the physical repetition of the protocol. Andy insists you must role-play this scenario with your family every 30, 60, or 90 days.
It must become muscle memory. The psychological value of this in a disaster is immeasurable. Sarah's method requires you to mentally construct a parachute while you are in free fall.
Andy's method is an emergency parachute that you meticulously packed on the ground months ago. When the crisis hits, you aren't expending precious cognitive bandwidth, wondering if your spouse went to the school or the house. You know exactly which step of the algorithm they are executing. You bypass the panic entirely.
It is the ultimate distillation of intelligence training for the civilian world. In an environment characterized by unpredictable asymmetrical threats, the most effective defense mechanism is a simple, rigidly practiced routine.
What an immense paradigm-shifting journey this analysis has been. We have traversed the geopolitical macro terrors, understanding how China leverages economic infrastructure, and confronting the highly specific, multi-phased horrors of Bajinka 2.0.
We have exposed the psychological architecture of propaganda, realizing that foreign adversaries are weaponizing our own health anxieties to erode trust in our institutions.
We pulled back the curtain on the CIA, revealing not a sterile machine of perfection, but a chaotic, human bureaucracy struggling with the same management flaws as a mid-level corporation.
We analyzed historical conspiracies, learning that the intelligence value of a myth often outweighs its factual truth.
And finally, we confronted the jarring reality that our external privacy has already been commodified, leaving us to navigate a world watched by billions of cameras.
It demands a complete reevaluation of our position in society. You can no longer view yourself simply as a passive citizen. You must recognize that your attention, your data, and your anxieties are the primary battleground of modern warfare.
As we conclude this deep dive, I want to ask you for one final insight. Something provocative for the listener to carry with them, building on the terrifying technological trajectory we just discussed.
Consider the convergence of the technologies we analyze today. We discussed the hypothetical $300 lie detector app, and we debated it as a philosophical concept that would destroy social trust. But Andy and Sarah also briefly mentioned the plot of a recent sci-fi film where an artificial intelligence serves as a judicial magistrate, possessing instantaneous access to every digital footprint a person has ever left to determine their guilt. Bring those concepts together. When you combine the omnipresent flock cameras tracking every physical movement of your vehicle, the biometric data, your heart rate, your sleep cycles, your location, that you voluntarily stream to tech corporations every second of the day, and the communication metadata the NSA collects. You don't need an app to detect a lie. If you feed that incomprehensible ocean of data into an AI system moving at the speed of Anthropic's models, we've already built the ultimate omniscient lie detector. The infrastructure is fully deployed, humming quietly in server farms. The question we must ask ourselves isn't whether society will eventually lose its secrets. The question is, what kind of society will we become when we finally realize the cave is completely illuminated and there's absolutely nowhere left to hide?
When the smoke clears, the algorithms process the data, and there are no diagnostic muddy waters left to conceal our flaws. Thank you for joining us on this intense, uncompromising exploration of the world's shadows. We will see you on the next Deep Dive.